Hello, Python coders. So in today's video, we're going to be continuing our discussion of signals and slots, but I'm also going to be coupling that together with a discussion of QDialogs and two different methods for running QDialogs. So what I've got for you today is a simple application that is going to show us a table of people. And then I have another function or another program created to add to that table. Now, when we are running QDialogs, which is what both of these are based off of, we have two different ways of opening QDialogs. One is with running the execute method. The other is running the .open method. Now, in QDialogs, running the .execute method does something fairly unique, which is it will open or spin up its own event loop. So in this particular case, both of these are QDialogs, and both of these are going to spin up their own event loops. And when I come down here to my custom functions here, getting past all this, when I open up the add window to add a new person, you'll see that immediately afterwards, I'm going to be reloading the table. And that's because I want what I've added into the database to show up in the table. This .execute that is ran inside of add edit person is going to block. So we're going to stop at this line of code here, and we're not going to continue until that dialog is complete. Then it can run the load table. So for demonstration purposes, we'll go ahead and run this. You'll see currently I have no people defined, so I'll hit add. Now I have spun up another event loop, and I am stuck inside of the add person dialog box here. So if I add a new person and I hit enter, okay, I can keep adding people until I'm done with this. Then if I click close or I hit escape, you'll see that it takes me back into my work with persons window, and now I've got those two people from the database. Okay, so what's the problem? Well, the problem comes in on should you use .execute when you are opening dialogs based on QDialog. If we take a look at the documentation from Qt, and what I'm looking at here is the documentation for QDialog, and I've gone down to the section on .execute. So it'll say shows the dialog as a modal dialog, blocking until the user closes it. The function returns a dialog code result, and we will get more into this in a little bit here. If the dialog is application modal, users cannot interact with any other window. Okay. Now, here's where things get interesting. And this is the note that is provided by Qt, which is avoid using this function. Instead, use open. Unlike execute, open is asynchronous, does not spin an additional event loop. I don't know why they don't say fires up or spawns up, but they say spins, an additional event loop. This prevents a series of dangerous bugs from happening. Example of deleting the dialog's parent while the dialog is open via execute. When using open, you can connect to the finished signal of QDialog to be notified when the dialog is closed. Okay, this has caused a ton of debate. And one of the things that really irritates me sometimes about books that have been written about using PyQt, PySide, is that all of the examples that I see in the books, a great deal of the examples that I see in YouTube videos, they are using .execute. Any tutorial that you open up and look at they generally are using .execute. It's become ubiquitous. It's everywhere. However, it depends on who you survey in the community about should you be using .execute. Now, according to the tool provider, which is Qt, this is Qt for Python or PySide, they're saying that you should avoid using this function. Instead, you should use .open. I have looked at forum posts, and I've made a few myself in the past asking about this. One particular person came back with the very interesting response of read the documentation. That's always helpful. Another person came back to me one time and said, that documentation is an abomination. Don't pay any attention to it. Well, I'll leave it up to you, basically, on should you be using .execute or .open, but really, if we really want to do things by the letter, according to the manufacturer of the third-party library, PySide, you should technically be using open. I've never experienced any issues using .execute. However, I will link in the YouTube video here, down in the description, I will link to this post, which was made in 2010. And this was written shortly after they gave us the .open for dialog boxes. And this does cover some of the issues that you might run into. And this was applicable to, okay, this was Qt.45. We added alternative functions to our dialogs. The open pattern was introduced. So .open has been in Qt since version 4.5. So that means we're on 6 something, and so that means that even after all that time has passed, we can still use .execute. All right, so you've looked at all these YouTube videos, you've looked at the examples in the books where they use .execute. What's the alternative? If I'm going to use .open, how do I actually do that? Well, let's go ahead and close these. And I have that example set up right here, which is a work with persons 2 and an add edit person 2. And it's doing that thing where it won't open them again. I really do hate that. Thank you. Okay, so if we're going to do things the way we're supposed to do them, okay, what I'm doing here is I'm going to be creating my window, which is my work with persons window that has the table in it. Then I'm going to call window.open. When I look at my add edit person, it's going to be the same thing. If I were to open this on its own, it's going to be a .open. All right, now if I go into the code for actually adding a new record, all right, so this is when I click the button. I'm going to create the new form, same as I would have done with the .execute, except I am going to be connecting to a signal called finished. So when you have a QDialog box, normally you see QDialog boxes with OK and cancel. If I click the cancel button, that usually gets connected to a method called .reject. If I click the OK button, that generally gets connected to a method of .accept. Did they accept the dialog box or did they reject the dialog box? You can also do this with buttons yes and no, and I'll show you that example in a little bit here. When I do that, the QDialog can actually emit a finished signal for me automatically. Then I can connect that finished signal to whatever method inside my class that I want. In this particular case, I'm going to say load table. So when they're finished with the add edit dialog, in this case it's just adding records, but once they're finished with that, it'll come back here and it's going to run this, which is going to reload the table. So as you'll see here, I actually have a main event loop. So I have an app.execute. So this particular application here only has one event loop, and it is the main event loop coming from the application itself. If we run this, you're going to see that it's going to function exactly the same as the previous did. I'll click add. I can put in an ID. I can put in a name. So Ethan Smith. When I hit escape, you'll see that it reloads the table. And that's because, I'll go ahead and close this, that's because I have my finished signal connected to my load table method. So technically, this is the way you're supposed to do it. How many people actually do it this way? I have absolutely no idea. Um, Documentation says that you should do it this way. You should avoid using execute. You should use open. But quite frankly, in all the tutorials and all the examples I've been shown, I don't see people doing this very often. Now, another method or reason for using dialogs, I'm going to switch to my testing project here, is for messages. And let's see, I'm going to open up this. No, I want my send test message. All right. All right. So in this particular case, I have got a message box that I actually send a message in. And the reason that we would normally use .execute is because I can get a response back from that dialog box. So if I go ahead and run this, what you're going to see is if I push the send message button, I actually get a message here, which is I can click show details, and it says please respond yes or no. If I hit yes, okay, I'll get yes was printed. If I do this again and I click no, I'll see no was pressed. And that's because I am testing the response that came back. So .execute will directly return the response that comes back, and that response is an enum of 0 or 1. And then I can test that against Qt widgets, QDialog, dialog code, accepted or rejected. So this would be okay if I was using okay or cancel. This would be okay. This would be cancel. In many cases, I don't even care what the dialog box returns. For instance, in my previous example that we were just looking at, I really don't care that they've closed the dialog box. All I want to know is, yes, they are done with the dialog box. They have closed it. I need to reload the table. In this particular case, I'm actually capturing the response. And the reason that I want to capture the response is because I want to know what am I going to do. So let's say I was trying to delete a record in a database, but that record has other associated records with it, and there's a constraint that says no, if there are associated foreign keys, I can't delete this record. So if I tried to do that and I encountered an error, I could pop up a message box like this and I could say, I couldn't delete this record. Would you like me to make this person inactive? So I have a field inside that table that defines whether that person is active or inactive. And I could just say, make this person inactive instead. So in that case, I need to capture the response that comes back. So this is fairly common for people to do with .execute because it directly returns a response. Can I do the same thing if I use .open? Actually, yes, you can. And that's because if we come back here and we look at the documentation for finished, you'll see that finished actually provides us that same result. So that will be a 0 or a 1, which will correspond to the accepted or rejected. So that enum will be passed back by dot finished. So yes, you can. You can get the same exact results. The problem is that, well, it's not a problem. It's just a symptom of the nature of it. It's going to require you to write a few more lines of code. So yes, you can still get the response back. What button did they push? Did they accept the dialog or did they reject it? Okay. But you're going to have to capture that signal and then you're going to have to test that result yourself. Now, in the long run, I don't know what's going to happen with .execute. They may never touch this. Then again, in a couple of releases, they may come out and say, well, folks, it's been a great run, but you're actually supposed to be using open, so we're going to be taking .execute away. I have no insider information in this, so I have no idea. It's been over 10 years. It's been almost 13 years, and they still haven't taken this out. So it must not be too bad, and they must not be too angry with it, because they've left it in here now for well over 13 years after they provided open. Again, I can't tell you how to code. I'm just showing you what's going on. I've had people ask me, well, hey, I see this in tutorials all the time, but according to this documentation, and I'm like, yes, I know. I wish they would make up their mind and either get rid of .execute or just say, well, yeah, it's not really as bad as we think. In any event, that's my discussion for today. If you do have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below. And again, as always, happy coding.